Now we all know that Bowser is a huge fan of traps. We've seen a ton of them in the Super Mario games after all, especially in his castles. And today we will once again cover one of those traps, because just like the enemies, they have a huge impact on the game's level design. Now the one we will look at today is the fire bar, which is a rotating bar that's made of fireballs. Quite a crazy device as you can imagine. However, how did these evolve over the years when it comes to design, story, gameplay, and use? Well, let's find out what changed when it comes to the 4 horsemen of evolution apocalypse. Now the fire bars made their debut in Super Mario Bros. Obviously, they aren't a living enemy and function more as an obstacle as they rotate around a block in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. They often appear on the ceiling and floors of castles, and more rarely, in underwater sections. Now the first level in which we see them is World 1-4, which is a castle level as you could have expected. Now if you come into contact with one of them, you will take damage from the fire. Obviously. That's why they are a problem after all. Now in the game we see them at a lot of different locations, and they can make the levels a hell of a lot harder. In general, these obstacles are difficult to deal with because of one reason. They require good timing. They spin at a certain speed after all, and if you jump in at the wrong time, then you will most likely get hit by it. So that's what you need to keep in mind, which isn't always easy to do because Nintendo always tries to make it hard to pull off, either by putting it in an awkward location where you first have to jump to it, for example, or they just put enemies there. But that's not all. There's also another thing that they can do, which is even more evil. They will put stuff like coins, power-ups, or other collectibles in the path of the fire bar. This way players will be tempted to get those items, but doing so is quite risky because of the spinning fire bar that's in your way. In general, Nintendo really wants to trick the player, and at times this is certainly effective. So what would they do with it in the next game then? They could easily combine it with other stuff to make it even more complex and difficult to deal with. So did they do that? Well, no, of course not, because again they got distracted. In the games that came after, like Super Mario World and Land, they used other obstacles that were incredibly similar. Think of things like the odd roto discs, which are just some spinning balls, and normal spinners, which are just balls on a chain that also spin around, or swing back and forth. So these new similar looking obstacles are just like the fireballs. And to be honest, I don't know why Nintendo even did this. Sure, those obstacles seem new, but at the end of the day, they just aren't. They're simply a different version of the same thing. However, after not being seen in ages in the 2D games, Nintendo finally got to the 3D games, because all of a sudden the technology was ready for it at the end of the 90s. However, as you could have expected, now that they were in a 3D world, things had to change a bit. Now the first time we saw them in their 3D glory was in Super Mario 64, which was also the first ever game like this. In this title, they are only seen in one of the worlds, Lethal Lava Land, which is the fire-themed world of the game. And when you see them, there's one thing that you notice right away. Unlike fire bars in the 2D games, they spin horizontally, which was never really possible in the older games. And another thing that's also different from their 2D appearances is that there can be more than one fire bar rotating on the same axis. So from this information alone, you can already understand that their role is completely different compared to the 2D titles. In Super Mario 64, it isn't really a timing thing. Sure, it still plays a role to an extent, but the fire bars aren't some sort of unescapable thing anymore. Because in 3D games, you can easily dodge obstacles like this if they were set up in their old configuration. One enemy that also suffered from this was the Bullet Bill, because in a 3D world, you can just walk past it left or right, which was never a thing in 2D Mario games. And so, in order for that enemy to function, they ended up adding more of them, certain versions that would follow you around, or they would just narrow the pathway of the player. And when it comes to the fire bar, they just changed the way it moves. And while it isn't unescapable anymore, they are tricky to get past because they require a good jump to get over. So of course, timing is still quite crucial. However, if you mess up, then you're not out of the race. Although I have to say, when you touch fire, Mario will run around like a lunatic, which could be your end. So they are still very dangerous. but you can dodge them now at least, and compared to the 2D games, they do less damage. However, overall, they're still a fun addition to the game. They have become more of a jumping obstacle in titles like this. So, with this huge and successful transformation, what would be next for them? Well, Nintendo forgot about them again! Because after Super Mario 64, they went on to make more 3D titles like Super Mario Sunshine, but here the fire bars were nowhere to be seen once again. Only when Nintendo moved on to the extremely successful DS and Wii era, we got to see them again. Because during that time period, we got a revived version of the 2D games known as New Super Mario Bros., which took inspiration from the earlier games in the 90s. In this game, they first appear in World 6-4, and are also seen in the second tower of World 8, and a lone one appears in Bowser's Castle. Here they act just like they do in Super Mario Bros., but are found more commonly on the ceilings and floors. So to be honest, when they returned, nothing new was really added. It was even limited in some ways, I would say. But still, even though they were seen in this game and their role was small, they could be held to deal with, especially in those narrow hallways. Clearly, so far, the fire bar was becoming a bit stale, and even when they were brought back in New Super Mario Bros., nothing new happened really. They were even more limited than they were in the first game, which was released in 1985. And for a lot of you, that's the Stone Age. However, one thing I did notice is that they started to use the fire bar in more unique situations. They really started to expand on them without changing them. And we see this in Super Mario Galaxy. Here they appear as obstacles in a number of different galaxies, including the Sling Pod Galaxy, the Toy Time Galaxy, Bowser's Star Reactor, and Bowser's Galaxy Reactor. One great example of the fire bars being used in a cool way, which is actually seen in Sling Pod Galaxy, which is a weird world in general. Here you shoot yourself from spiderweb bundle to spiderweb bundle trying to reach the star at the very end, and along the way you encounter the fire bars, where they actually serve a similar role to what they did in Super Mario Bros. They are some sort of fiery, unstoppable force, and that's because if you get hit when flying from place to place, it can mean death or at least a huge setback. So, in order to get past them, you would need to time your moves, or it would be your end. Which is quite cool to be honest, and a fun use of the obstacle. Even when you pull Mario back to shoot him away, you need to watch out for them, because they can still hit you. Well, I think that's the case at least. So while they stayed the same, Nintendo did start to use them more for cool stuff like this. And in the next New Super Mario Bros. Game for the Wii, we also got a taste of this. In this title, fire bars only appear in a handful of places, and they have a special role now. They are often used to guard star coins, which is a concept we saw in the first game, but now Nintendo committed to it fully. The best thing they can do with the fire bar is place it in a difficult spot and then lure you in with a reward like a star coin. So again, while this isn't necessarily new in any way, they do start to use it more in ways like this, which is great. And in Super Mario 3D Land, we again get an example of something like this happening. In this game, there's a level where you need to use some sort of seesaw to get to the end of the level, and you control it by standing on the side you want to move towards. And of course, along the route, Nintendo put fire bars, and as you can imagine, this again made for quite an interesting challenge for the player. You need to time it again after all. However, the seesaw isn't the easiest thing to use. And if you have to jump in order to dodge something, it can also mess with the direction you're going towards. So it's clear that Nintendo wasn't really reinventing the wheel or something. However, they did start to use something we have all seen a million times before in completely new ways. And then I haven't even mentioned all the examples of something like this happening. There are a lot more examples of Nintendo using the fire bars in very unique, creative and special ways. The past 10 years, Nintendo has done some surprising things with them. So to be honest, while the fire bars didn't change that much, because it was the same in almost every game and all the different versions were just bigger or made out of something else like spikes, they still did something cool. So in general, they are still interesting and very important to so many levels seen in the games throughout the years. And all of that is because of Nintendo doing their best to put it in unique scenarios, exploiting its powers to make amazing levels. So in general, it's not a problem that they haven't changed much in the recent years. Sometimes, change isn't necessarily a good thing. Instead, you just need to use it in different or new ways. But be sure to tell me in the comment section down below what you think about the fire bars. And don't forget, be sure to subscribe and click the bell button, check the videos in the upper right corner, leave a like, and of course, leave a comment, naughty or nice, and I will see you all in the next video.